The little girl clutched both infants against her thin frame as she stood trembling on the scorching sidewalk. Blood trickled from her split lip while the July sun beat down mercilessly. 8 years old and already carrying a burden no child should bear. Thief, ungrateful, little thief. Vanessa Mitchell's shriek cut through the suburban quiet of the Boston neighborhood. She towered over the child, her manicured hands still raised from the slap she had delivered moments before. Behind her, Paul Mitchell crossed his arms, his face a mask of cold disapproval. One rule, we gave you one simple rule, Lily, one scoop of formula per bottle. Vanessa's voice dripped with venom as she poured the freshly mixed formula onto the concrete. White liquid spread across the sidewalk, evaporating almost instantly in the heat. If you want more milk, go beg for it on the street. The 8-year-old pressed her bare feet together, fighting to maintain balance while holding both 6-month-old twins. Noah whimpered against her left shoulder, his small body burning with fever. Elijah clutched her shirt with surprising strength, his cracked lips opening and closing in silent hunger. Please, Aunt Vanessa. Noah and Elijah are sick. The doctor said they need more formula when they have a fever. Lily's voice was barely audible, years of experience teaching her that loud pleas only brought harsher punishment. I'll clean the whole house. I'll do double chores. Please just let them have enough to eat. Paul stepped forward, his breathing heavy with anger. Disrespect. That's all we get after taking you in, after everything we've done. He threw open the iron gate, its hinges protesting with a metallic screech. Out! Maybe a few hours in the heat will teach you the value of rules. The neighborhood remained silent. Behind lace curtains and through half-closed blinds, eyes watched but no doors opened. No voices rose in protest. The world had turned its back on 3 orphaned children. Lily sank to her knees, her strength failing as she struggled to hold both infants. Please, Uncle Paul. Noah's fever is getting worse. Just let us sit in the shade. I won't ask for anything else. The front door slammed shut. The deadbolt slid into place with grim finality. At that precise moment, a midnight blue Bentley Continental GT turned the corner, its engine purring with quiet power. The car slowed, then stopped completely. Behind the wheel sat Richard Bennett, CEO of Bennett Technologies and one of Boston's most influential men. Richard had been driving aimlessly for hours, his mind replaying memories he couldn't escape. Earlier that morning, he had stood alone at Pine Hill Cemetery, placing white roses on Sarah's grave. 25 years of marriage cut short by cancer, their anniversary, now marked only by his solitary visits to cold marble. You were right, Sarah, he had whispered to the headstone. A man only understands the value of what he has when it's gone. Now, as Richard's eyes focused on the 3 children abandoned in the summer heat, something long dormant stirred within him. The little girl's desperate attempt to protect the infants struck a chord so deep he almost gasped with the pain of recognition. He saw himself 25 years earlier, holding newborn twins, while a doctor explained that Sarah wouldn't survive the night. He remembered the helplessness, the terror, the absolute certainty that he wasn't equipped for what lay ahead. Richard's hand moved to the door handle, as if controlled by someone else. For decades, he had trained himself to look away from others' suffering to focus solely on building his technology empire. He had delegates for charity work foundations to handle philanthropic obligations, staff to manage all human concerns. Yet Sarah's final words echoed in his mind, "Promise me you'll never abandon anyone else the way you abandoned us." He had been so consumed with building Bennett Technologies that he had missed the early symptoms of her illness. By the time they caught it, the cancer had already spread. His wealth and power proved worthless against death's advance. The Bentley's door opened. Richard stepped out, adjusting his $5,000 suit with mechanical precision. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath as he approached the children. Lily looked up, her eyes widening at the sight of the distinguished gentleman walking toward them. Terror and hope warred in her expression. Strangers rarely meant safety in her experience. Richard knelt down, unmindful of his Italian wool trousers against the dirty sidewalk. With practiced gentleness, he placed the back of his hand against Noah's forehead. The heat radiating from the infant was alarming. "This baby needs medical attention immediately." Richard said, his voice soft but carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "His temperature is dangerously high." The front door flew open. Paul Mitchell stepped out, and his demeanor changing instantly at the sight of the wealthy stranger. "Mr. Bennett, what a surprise seeing you in our neighborhood." His voice transformed into an obsequious whine. "Just dealing with a little family discipline. The girl stole from us, you see. We're teaching her about consequences." Richard stood slowly, his 6'2" frame towering over Paul. He studied the man with the calculated assessment he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. "The only thing I see," Richard replied, each word precisely measured, "is 3 children in medical distress, abandoned in 90-degree heat." Vanessa appeared behind Paul, her hostility thinly veiled behind a forced smile. "These children are our responsibility, Mr. Bennett. We appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter." Richard's gaze hardened, years of boardroom battles evident in his unwavering stare. A real man doesn't strike children or deprive them of necessities. A real man protects those weaker than himself. He paused, letting his words settle like stones. "That's not merely an opinion. It's the difference between humanity and barbarism." The street remained silent, except for Noah's labored breathing. Neighbors watched from windows but remained paralyzed by the confrontation unfolding on their perfectly manicured lawns. Richard turned back to Lily, offering his hand with unexpected gentleness. "My name is Richard. Those babies need help. Will you allow me to take you somewhere safe?" Lily hesitated, years of broken promises making her wary. But Noah's burning skin against her neck left no room for indecision. She nodded once, clutching Elijah tighter as she took Richard's outstretched hand. "You can't take them. They're legally under our guardianship." Vanessa's voice rose to a screech. Richard didn't bother turning around. "Call the authorities if you wish. I'll be happy to explain why I removed children from an abusive situation." His voice carried the weight of countless legal victories. "I suspect neither of you wants that level of scrutiny." Paul and Vanessa fell silent, exchanging glances filled with calculation rather than concern. Richard guided Lily toward the Bentley, opening the rear door with one hand, while supporting her elbow with the other. As the door swung open, Lily froze at the sight of 2 identical men in their early 30s glaring from the back seat. Matthew and Jason Bennett, Richard's twin sons, sat in matching charcoal suits, their faces mirror images of annoyance. While physically identical, subtle differences distinguished them. Matthew's expression held exasperation, while Jason's conveyed cold assessment. "Again, Dad, really?" Matthew's voice carried the weariness of someone who had witnessed this scene too many times before. "We have the board meeting in less than an hour." Jason simply checked his watch, his silence more damning than his brother's complaint. Richard ignored them both, helping Lily into the car with surprising deftness. "Matthew, you're a doctor. Check the infant's vital signs. He's burning with fever." "I'm a neurosurgeon, not a pediatrician," Matthew muttered, but his medical training overrode his irritation. He leaned forward, pressing 2 fingers against Noah's neck, his frown deepening. "Pulse is too rapid. How long has he been like this?" "Since last night," Lily whispered, shrinking into the leather seat. "They wouldn't let me give them extra formula, even though the doctor said they need more when they're sick." Richard started the engine, pulling away from the curb with smooth efficiency. In the rearview mirror, he saw Paul and Vanessa watching, their expressions calculating rather than concerned. "There's a pharmacy 3 blocks over," Richard said, making a decisive turn. "We'll get supplies first, then head to my home where we can assess the situation properly. The Bennett Industries quarterly review starts in 45 minutes. Jason finally spoke, his voice precise as a blade. "The board won't wait even for you." Richard's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his past and present colliding in a moment of clarity. 25 years ago, he had chosen a board meeting over taking Sarah to her doctor's appointment. The memory stabbed through him with fresh pain. "Some things matter more than quarterly reviews," Richard replied, his voice carrying a conviction that silenced both sons. As the car stopped at the pharmacy, Richard experienced a flash of memory so vivid it nearly took his breath away. He remembered standing in a similar store 25 years earlier, a list clutched in his hand, desperately trying to decipher which formula to buy for his newborn sons after Sarah's death. The confusion, the inadequacy, the bone-deep fear that he would fail these tiny lives depending on him. "I need infant formula, children's fever reducer, electrolyte solution, and clean bottles," Richard instructed as he handed his credit card to Matthew. "And baby wipes. Get the hypoallergenic kind." Matthew stared at his father in disbelief. "How do you know all this?" Richard met his son's gaze with unexpected vulnerability. "Because 25 years ago, I had to learn everything about caring for infants in a single night. When your mother died, there was no one else." The statement hung in the air between them. Matthew's expression softened fractionally before he exited the car. While they waited, Noah's whimpering escalated to full cries. Richard turned in his seat, reaching back with practiced movements. "May I?" he asked Lily, gesturing toward Noah. The girl hesitated, then gently transferred the fevered infant into Richard's waiting hands. With surprising competence, Richard cradled the baby against his chest, one hand supporting Noah's head, while the other checked his temperature again. "When did they last have water?" Richard asked, noting the signs of dehydration around the infant's eyes. "This morning. They only let me give them one small bottle each day." Lily's voice trembled. "I tried to sneak more, but they caught me." Jason watched this exchange with thinly disguised impatience. "Dad, this is exactly what happened with the Rodriguez family and the Patels before them. You can't save everyone." "I'm not trying to save everyone," Richard replied without looking up from Noah. "Just these three." Matthew returned with several bags of supplies. Without being asked, he organized them efficiently, opening packages and preparing formula with the precision of a surgeon. "Temperature first, then hydration," Richard instructed, accepting the digital thermometer Matthew handed him. The reading made him frown deeply. 104.2, too high. We need to cool him down gradually and get medication into him immediately. Working in tandem that belied their earlier conflict, Richard and Matthew administered infant fever reducer, while Jason reluctantly held Elijah, his discomfort evident, but his grip secure. Lily watched wide-eyed as these wealthy strangers tended to her brothers with more care than they had received in months. A dangerous hope flickered inside her chest, dangerous because hope had proven painful too many times before. As Noah's cries subsided to whimpers, Richard started the car again, heading toward Beacon Hill, where his home overlooked the Charles River. The Bennett estate had stood for 3 generations, a testament to old money now reinforced by new technology wealth. "Where are we going?" Lily asked, her voice small as she pressed herself into the corner of the seat. "Somewhere safe," Richard answered, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Somewhere your brothers can recover properly." They drove in silence through Boston's historic streets until the imposing Bennett mansion came into view. 3 stories of colonial architecture protected by wrought iron gates and a state-of-the-art security system. The house where Richard had raised his sons alone, the house that had never quite felt like a home since Sarah's death. As they pulled into the circular driveway, the front door opened. James Crawford, the Bennett's butler of 30 years, stood waiting with the implacable expression of someone who had witnessed every variety of human drama without comment. "James, we have guests who need immediate attention," Richard called as he exited the vehicle. "Prepare the East Wing guest rooms and bring fresh linens and towels." If James was surprised by the sight of his employer carrying a feverish infant while leading a bedraggled 8-year-old girl at the hand, he gave no indication. "Of course, sir. Shall I call Dr. Preston?" "Yes, tell him it's urgent. 2 6-month-old infants with high fever and possible dehydration." Lily hesitated at the threshold of the massive home, overwhelmed by its grandeur. Marble floors stretched before her chandeliers, casting prisms of light across walls adorned with artwork worth more than most houses in her neighborhood. "I'm very dirty," she whispered, looking down at her bare, filthy feet. "I'll mess up your pretty floors." Richard paused, something in her words cutting through his practiced efficiency. He knelt down to her eye level, still cradling Noah against his shoulder. "Lily, listen to me. This house has stood for over 100 years. It has weathered wars, depressions, and nor'easters. A little dirt won't hurt it." His voice softened. "People matter more than things. Always." The words hung between them, carrying weight beyond their surface meaning. Matthew and Jason exchanged glances, recognizing a sentiment they had rarely heard from their father, a man whose obsession with building his technology empire had often seemed his only passion. James led them to a suite of rooms decorated in soft blues and creams. A large bedroom connected to a smaller one with 2 antique cribs that hadn't been used since Matthew and Jason were infants. "Sarah had these made when we learned we were having twins," Richard explained, seeing Lily's questioning glance at the beautifully carved mahogany. "They've been waiting for someone to use them again." While Richard and Matthew tended to Noah, James brought warm water and clean cloths for Lily to wash herself and Elijah. The elderly butler moved with quiet efficiency, showing neither judgment nor pity toward their condition. "Would you care for something to eat, Miss Lily?" James asked, his formal tone, somehow making Lily feel respected rather than intimidated. "Could my brothers have more formula first? They're very hungry." The question revealed priorities shaped by months of deprivation. "There is plenty for everyone," James assured her. "No one goes hungry in this house." In the kitchen, Richard prepared a simple meal while Matthew continued monitoring the twins. Jason paced the perimeter of the room, phone pressed to his ear as he rescheduled the board meeting with clipped efficiency. "The Bennett Technologies quarterly review will be postponed until tomorrow morning," Jason announced after ending his call. "I've cited a family emergency." Richard nodded acknowledgement as he set a plate of grilled cheese sandwiches and soup on the table. Thank you, Jason. Lily stared at the food, then at her brothers who had finally fallen into peaceful sleep after drinking their formula. May I save some for later, for my brothers when they wake up? The question sent another jolt of recognition through Richard. He remembered his own childhood poverty before his technology innovations had built his fortune, the ingrained habit of hoarding food, never knowing when the next meal would come. Lily, there will always be enough food here, he said gently. But if it makes you feel better, we can put some aside for them. As they ate, Richard observed the girl carefully. Despite her obvious exhaustion, she maintained perfect posture and impeccable manners. Someone had taught her well before she ended up with Paul and Vanessa. Can you tell me about your parents? Richard asked carefully. Lily's fork paused halfway to her mouth. They died in a car accident last year. Dad was a history professor. Mom was an artist. Her voice carried the flatness of rehearsed grief. They were going out for their anniversary dinner. The babysitter called Aunt Vanessa when they didn't come home. And they're your real aunt and uncle? Matthew asked, medical suspicion evident in his tone. Aunt Vanessa is my mom's stepsister. They didn't talk much until after. Her voice trailed off. Uncle Paul said they're our only family now. They said we should be grateful they took us in instead of letting the state separate us. Richard exchanged meaningful glances with Matthew. The threat of separation was a powerful tool for controlling vulnerable children. Where did you live before the accident? Richard asked. Cambridge. Dad taught at the university. Pride briefly illuminated Lily's exhausted features. He wrote books about the Civil War. Mom illustrated children's books. Our house had a big tree in the backyard with a swing. The simple description revealed volumes about what the children had lost, not just parents, but security, comfort, and belonging. While they spoke, James answered a ring at the door, returning moments later. Sir Dr. Preston has arrived. Dr. Thomas Preston, a pediatrician in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, entered carrying his medical bag. He had treated Matthew and Jason throughout their childhood and remained the Bennett family physician. Richard, you mentioned an emergency with infants. His eyes found the sleeping babies, then widened slightly at their condition. Without further questions, he moved to examine them, his experienced hands gentle but thorough. After a complete examination, Dr. Preston's expression was grave. Both babies show signs of malnourishment in the beginnings of failure to thrive. They're underweight for their age. The fever appears to be from an ear infection, which I can treat, but their overall condition concerns me greatly. Will they be okay? Lily asked, her small voice cracking with fear. Dr. Preston smiled at her reassuringly. With proper care, yes, they're young enough to recover completely. He turned to Richard, his expression serious again. I need to know the circumstances here, Richard. Richard explained the situation concisely, years of business presentations, making him adept at conveying essential information without emotional overlay. Dr. Preston's face darkened. This is reportable neglect. As a physician, I'm obligated to contact the Department of Children and Families. I understand, Richard nodded. That's appropriate. But these children will not be returning to that home in the meantime. Dad, you need to consider the legal implications here. Jason interjected, his legal training evident in his cautious tone. Removing children from their legal guardians regardless of circumstances could be construed as kidnapping. Sometimes doing the right thing means accepting legal risk, Richard replied with unexpected firmness. I made the wrong choice once putting caution above action. I won't make that mistake again. The statement silenced the room. Both sons recognized the reference to their mother's illness, how Richard's delay in insisting on medical intervention might have cost critical treatment time. Dr. Preston wrote prescriptions for antibiotics and additional medications, providing detailed instructions for care. I'll return tomorrow to check their progress. In the meantime, consistent feeding, hydration, and medication are essential. After the doctor left, Richard showed Lily to her room, a guest suite connected to the smaller room where the twins would sleep. The bed was larger than any Lily had seen, with crisp white sheets and a view of the Boston skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. My brothers and I will be just down the hall if you need anything, Richard explained, showing her the intercom system. Just press this button and someone will come immediately. Lily looked around the opulent room, then back at Richard with confusion evident in her tired eyes. What do I have to do to stay here? The question hit Richard like a physical blow. Aunt Vanessa said nothing's free. What chores do I need to do? I can clean bathrooms really well. And I know how to iron shirts without burning them. Richard felt something crack inside his carefully maintained composure. This child expected to earn her safety to work for basic protection. How many other lessons had life already taught her about the conditional nature of adult care? Lily, the only thing you need to do here is rest, eat, and take care of yourself and your brothers. He kept his voice steady with effort. Your children, not servants. Skepticism flashed across her face, the wariness of someone who had heard promises before. Richard recognized that look. It would take more than words to earn this child's trust. Actions alone would speak the truth to her. After settling the twins in their cribs with monitors positioned carefully, Richard found Lily standing in the center of the room, clearly afraid to touch anything or sit on the pristine bedding. May I tell you a story? He asked, gesturing toward the bed. It might help you sleep. Lily nodded cautiously, perching on the edge of the mattress as if prepared to flee. Richard sat in the armchair beside the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. When my sons were born, I had no idea how to be a father. Their mother died the day after their birth, and suddenly I was alone with two infants. I was terrified. Lily's eyes widened slightly. What did you do? I made many mistakes, Richard admitted. I focused too much on building my company and not enough on building my relationship with them. I thought providing financial security was enough. He paused, memories flooding back. I was wrong. The confession hung in the air between them, unexpected vulnerability from this powerful man. But you learned, Lily asked softly. I'm still learning, Richard replied. That's the secret about being a grown-up that no one tells you. We're all still figuring it out as we go. For the first time, Lily's rigid posture softened slightly. She allowed herself to lean back against the pillows, her exhaustion finally overwhelming her wariness. Try to rest, Richard said, standing to leave. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. As he reached the door, Lily's voice stopped him. Mr. Bennett, thank you for the milk for my brothers. The simple gratitude for such a basic necessity tightened Richard's throat. You're welcome, Lily. Richard closed the door quietly behind him, finding Matthew and Jason waiting in the hallway. Their expressions reflected conflicting emotions: concern, annoyance, confusion. Dad, what exactly is your plan here? Matthew demanded in a harsh whisper. To ensure 3 children aren't returned to an abusive home, Richard replied evenly. And legally, Jason pressed, because removing children from their legal guardians, however justified, has serious implications. Richard's expression hardened with resolve that his sons rarely witnessed. I'll contact Elizabeth Chen first thing tomorrow. If anyone can navigate this legally, she can. The Elizabeth Chen, Yim. Jason's eyebrows rose. The former attorney general. Yes, she owes me a favor. Richard checked his watch. For now, we need to establish a care schedule for the infants. They'll need medication and feeding every few hours. Matthew frowned. Dad, we have household staff for that. No, Richard's tone brooked no argument. These children have been failed by too many adults already. They won't be handed off to strangers again, no matter how well-intentioned. Jason shook his head in disbelief. You're seriously suggesting that we executives of a multi-billion-dollar technology corporation take turns feeding infants through the night? I'm not suggesting it. I'm stating it as fact. Richard's voice carried the same authority that had built an empire. Some responsibilities can't be delegated. Before either son could protest further, the security system chimed. James approached from the main staircase. Sir, there's a Detective Diana Reynolds at the gate requesting to speak with you. She says it's regarding the Mitchell children. Richard tensed, exchanging glances with Jason. That was faster than expected. Should I have security turn her away? James asked. No, Richard decided after a moment's consideration. Show her to my study, but first verify her credentials thoroughly. As James departed, Matthew's expression reflected growing concern. Dad, this could be serious. Child removal without court authorization. I know the risks, Richard interrupted, and I accept them. Jason studied his father with newfound curiosity. This isn't like you. You've always calculated every risk, weighed every decision. Perhaps it's time I stopped calculating and started acting on conviction. Richard straightened his tie armor, going back into place. Stay near the children. I'll handle Detective Reynolds. In his walnut-paneled study, Richard waited, standing behind his desk rather than sitting. The power position was habitual after decades of business negotiations. Detective Diana Reynolds entered with the confident stride of someone comfortable with authority. In her mid-40s, she wore a tailored pantsuit that balanced professionalism with practicality. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her expression revealing nothing. Mr. Bennett, she began without preamble, I understand you have 3 children on the premises who are legally under the guardianship of Paul and Vanessa Mitchell. I do, Richard confirmed without hesitation. I removed them from an abusive situation earlier today. The infants required immediate medical attention. Detective Reynolds' expression remained neutral. The Mitchells have filed a report claiming you took the children without permission. That's correct. I did so after witnessing physical abuse of the 8-year-old and medical neglect of both infants. Richard maintained steady eye contact. Dr. Thomas Preston examined all 3 children and can confirm their condition. Something flickered in the detective's eyes, a momentary break in her professional mask. I'm actually here about another matter that may be relevant. She placed a file on Richard's desk. This concerns the deaths of James and Catherine Walker, the children's parents. Richard leaned forward slightly. The car accident? Yes, except new evidence suggests it wasn't an accident. Detective Reynolds opened the file, revealing photographs of damaged brake lines. Our forensics team re-examined the vehicle. The brake lines show clear signs of tampering, mechanical sabotage that would cause catastrophic failure at high speed. The implications settled like lead in Richard's stomach. You're suggesting the parents were murdered. The investigation has been reopened as a homicide case. Detective Reynolds studied Richard carefully, which makes the welfare of these children even more critical, as they may be the only witnesses or potential targets. Targets! Richard's voice sharpened. Mr. Bennett, if someone deliberately killed the Walkers and the children, have now ended up with the Mitchells, who are demonstrating abusive behavior. She left the conclusion unspoken. Richard felt cold certainty settle over him. You think the Mitchells might be involved in the deaths? I can't comment on an active investigation. Her professional neutrality returned, but I am concerned about the children's safety. Richard made a swift decision. Detective Reynolds, I have no intention of returning these children to the Mitchells regardless of legal guardianship documents. If that means I face kidnapping charges, so be it. To his surprise, Detective Reynolds' expression softened fractionally. Officially, I should insist you return the children to their legal guardians immediately. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Unofficially, I believe keeping them here may be in their best interest while we investigate further. What are you suggesting? A compromise. File for emergency temporary custody first thing tomorrow morning. Judge Rebecca Martinez handles these cases. She prioritizes children's safety above procedural concerns. Detective Reynolds closed her file. In the meantime, I'll ensure no action is taken regarding the children tonight. Richard studied her with newfound respect. Why are you helping us? Because 6 months ago I requested re-examination of the Walker accident and was denied. Someone buried that request. Her professional mask slipped, revealing genuine anger. I don't like when justice is obstructed, especially when children are involved. After Detective Reynolds departed, Richard returned upstairs, finding Matthew seated in the hallway outside the children's room's medical journal in hand. Everything okay? Matthew asked, uncharacteristic concern in his voice. No, Richard replied honestly. But we're going to make it right. He nodded toward the children's door. How are they? Sleeping for now. I checked the baby's temperatures 15 minutes ago. They're responding to the medication. Matthew closed his journal. Dad, what's really going on here? This isn't just about 3 neglected kids, is it? Richard considered how much to share, then decided on complete honesty. The detective believes their parents' death wasn't an accident. She thinks the children might be in danger from the very people who were supposed to protect them. Matthew's expression hardened. You think the Mitchells killed their parents? I don't know, but I intend to find out. Richard glanced toward the children's door, and I intend to keep them safe while we do. The conversation was interrupted by a soft sound from within the room. Richard opened the door quietly to find Lily standing beside the twins' cribs, whispering to her sleeping brothers. It's okay, Noah. It's okay, Elijah. I won't let anyone hurt you. We're safe tonight. Her small hands stroked each infant's head with infinite tenderness. This nice man gave us milk and medicine. Maybe we can stay a little while. Unaware of being observed, Lily reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a piece of bread wrapped in a napkin, food saved from dinner. She carefully tucked it under the mattress, then whispered, just in case we have to leave quickly. The sight struck Richard with the force of physical pain. This child, who should be playing and learning and growing carelessly, instead carried the weight of her brother's survival on her thin shoulders. She had learned to prepare for abandonment, to never fully trust safety. Matthew appeared beside Richard, witnessing the same scene. His medical detachment crumbled as understanding dawned in his eyes. This wasn't just another of his father's impulsive charitable causes. This was a child fighting with everything she had to protect her family. When Lily turned and saw them watching, she froze like a small animal caught in headlights. I'm sorry, she whispered, backing away from the cribs. I was just checking on them. I didn't touch anything else. You don't need to apologize for caring for your brothers, Richard said gently. That's what family does. Matthew stepped forward, medical training overcoming his earlier resistance. The bread under the mattress might attract ants. Would you like me to put it somewhere safer? Maybe on that high shelf where it will stay clean until you need it. Lily studied him with wary assessment far beyond her years. Finally, she nodded once. Matthew carefully took the wrapped bread and placed it on the shelf, then added an unopened granola bar beside it, just in case you get hungry during the night. The small gesture acknowledgement of her fears, without dismissing them, seemed to reach Lily in a way that grand promises couldn't. Her shoulders relaxed fractionally. Try to sleep, Lily, Richard encouraged. One of us will be right outside all night. You just need to call if you or your brothers need anything. As they left the room, Matthew closed the door softly behind them. In the hallway, he turned to his father with newfound determination. I'll take first watch, he said quietly. You should rest. Tomorrow will be complicated. Richard recognized the shift in his son's attitude from reluctant participation to active commitment. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak past the emotion tightening his throat. In his bedroom, Richard stood at the window overlooking Boston Harbor. The city lights reflected on dark water, a tapestry of human connections and stories playing out in countless homes. Somewhere among those lights, Paul and Vanessa Mitchell were likely plotting their next move. Richard reached for his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. Elizabeth Richard Bennett. I apologize for calling so late. He paused, listening. Yes, it is an emergency. I need the best child advocacy lawyer in Massachusetts, and I need them first thing tomorrow morning. As he outlined the situation, Richard made a silent promise to 3 children sleeping under his roof. This time, he wouldn't be too late. This time, he would protect what mattered before it was lost. Some battles were worth fighting regardless of the cost. Outside the children's door, Matthew settled into the chair for his vigil, medical journal open but forgotten on his lap. Inside, Lily finally surrendered to exhaustion, one hand still reaching toward the cribs where her brothers slept peacefully for the first time in months. And somewhere in Boston, Detective Diana Reynolds opened a sealed evidence box containing personal effects from James and Catherine Walker's accident. Among the items was a man's antique pocket watch, its case dented, but intact. She pressed the release, and the watch sprang open, revealing an unexpected modification inside a tiny digital recording device hidden behind the watch face. What were you recording, Professor Walker? She whispered to herself. And who were you afraid of? The answer might determine whether 3 orphan children lived or died. Morning light spilled through the east-facing windows of the Bennett mansion, casting long golden rectangles across marble floors. Richard stood in his study, phone pressed to his ear, voice lowered, but intense. Across from him, Elizabeth Chen sat perfectly poised, her silver-streaked black hair pulled into an immaculate chignon. Her reputation as one of Boston's most formidable attorneys earned through 3 decades of legal battles. The emergency hearing is scheduled for 9 tomorrow morning with Judge Martinez, Elizabeth said, making notes in precise handwriting. We've requested sealed proceedings given the circumstances. Richard nodded, ending his call with his corporate legal team. What are our chances? Elizabeth's expression remained carefully neutral. Under normal circumstances, courts favor blood relatives as guardians, but these circumstances are far from normal. Before she could elaborate, the study door opened. Matthew entered, still wearing the clothes from the previous day, dark circles under his eyes testifying to his night-long vigil. The infant's temperatures are down, he reported. 101.2 for Noah, 100.8 for Elijah. They're responding well to the antibiotics. Richard felt a weight lift slightly from his shoulders. And Lily, still sleeping. She woke twice during the night to check on her brothers. I don't think she's used to sleeping deeply. Matthew's clinical assessment couldn't mask his growing concern for the children. Dad, Dr. Preston wants to document their condition more thoroughly for the court. He'll be here in an hour. Elizabeth nodded approvingly. Medical evidence will be crucial. Judge Martinez places tremendous weight on expert testimony. The relative calm was shattered by the mansion's security system chiming. James appeared at the doorway moments later, his usual composure slightly fractured. Sir Sheriff Robert Coleman and a team of officers are at the gate with a court order. They're demanding immediate entry. Richard exchanged glances with Elizabeth. This is happening faster than expected. The Mitchells must have connections, Elizabeth muttered, gathering her papers. Let them in, but record everything. Video and audio. James nodded, activating the mansion's comprehensive security protocols with a few taps on his tablet. Throughout the house, nearly invisible cameras activated, documenting what was about to unfold. Richard straightened his tie and rolled down his shirt sleeves. Matthew, stay with the children. Under no circumstances are they to be removed without my explicit approval. Matthew's jaw tightened with newfound resolve. Understood. The mansion's grand foyer, designed to impress visitors with its soaring ceilings and sweeping staircase, now served as the stage for a power confrontation. Sheriff Coleman entered first, followed by two uniformed officers and Emily Turner from the Department of Children and Families. Coleman was tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform pressed to military precision, his expression suggesting a man accustomed to immediate compliance. He held out an official document encased in a transparent folder. Mr. Bennett, we have a temporary custody transfer order signed by Judge Wilson requiring the immediate return of Lily Noah and Elijah Walker to their legal guardians. Richard accepted the document, scanning it quickly before passing it to Elizabeth. His voice remained calm, betraying none of the turmoil beneath. Sheriff Coleman, these children were removed from an abusive environment. The infants required emergency medical attention. Coleman's expression hardened. That's for DCF to evaluate, not for private citizens to decide. He gestured to Emily Turner, a thin woman in her 30s whose nervous demeanor suggested someone uncomfortable with confrontation. Ms. Turner will oversee the transfer. Elizabeth stepped forward, every inch the former Attorney General accustomed to commanding attention. Sheriff, we've filed for emergency temporary custody with Judge Martinez. A hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Until then, removing these children could place them in danger. Coleman's smile never reached his eyes. Unless you have a countermanding court order in hand, Ms. Chen, the current order stands. The standoff was interrupted by a small voice from the staircase. Please don't make us go back. All eyes turned to find Lily standing halfway down the grand staircase, her small frame dwarfed by the architectural grandeur surrounding her. Despite her obvious fear, she stood with her spine straight, chin lifted, in a posture that spoke of courage beyond her years. They hit me when I ask for food. They lock us in the closet when visitors come. Noah and Elijah are sick because they won't give them enough formula. Her voice trembled but remained clear. If you send us back, my brothers will die. Emily Turner's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine concern. She approached the staircase, her voice gentling. Lily, I'm from Children's Services. My job is to make sure you're safe. Then why would you send us back to people who hurt us? Lily's direct question carried the unassailable logic of childhood. Coleman cut in impatiently. Ms. Turner, please proceed with the transfer. We have other matters requiring attention today. The children require medical attention, Richard interjected. Dr. Thomas Preston has documented their condition and will testify that returning them to their previous environment would constitute medical neglect. Coleman's expression darkened. Mr. Bennett, I understand your concern, but obstructing a court order is a serious offense. The tension in the foyer escalated as neither side showed signs of yielding. Then the front door opened again, admitting Detective Diana Reynolds. She entered with purposeful strides, badge already in hand. Sheriff Coleman, I need a word. Her tone left no room for refusal. Coleman's annoyance was evident, but he stepped aside for a private conversation. Their hushed exchange grew increasingly heated, with Coleman's face flushing red, while Detective Reynolds maintained a composed but unyielding demeanor. Finally, Coleman returned, his expression tight with barely controlled anger. There appears to be a complicating factor in this case. The transfer will be delayed pending further investigation. Elizabeth Chen's eyebrow arched slightly, the equivalent of open astonishment from most people. On what grounds? Detective Reynolds stepped forward, addressing the room with professional detachment. I've opened an investigation into the deaths of James and Catherine Walker. New evidence suggests their car accident was staged. Until we determine whether there's a connection to the current guardianship situation, removing the children could compromise both their safety and our investigation. Richard watched Lily's reaction closely. The girl's eyes widened at the detective's words, her small body going completely still, the stillness of prey sensing danger. Coleman gathered his dignity, clearly unhappy with this development. I'll report this to Judge Wilson. Expect further action within 24 hours. He turned to Richard, voice lowered. This isn't over, Bennett. After the sheriff's team departed, Diana Reynolds remained behind. She waited until Elizabeth had escorted Lily back upstairs before addressing Richard. That bought you some time, but not much. Coleman and Judge Wilson are close friends. The sheriff will push for immediate enforcement. Why is he so invested in this case? Richard asked. It seems unusually personal. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Diana's expression revealed professional frustration. The Mitchells have no particular standing or connections that would warrant this level of attention. Elizabeth rejoined them, her legal mind already mapping strategy. We need to understand who's pulling strings behind the scenes. The Mitchells don't have this kind of influence on their own. Diana nodded agreement. I'm tracking financial connections now. The children inherited a trust fund after their parents' deaths. That might be relevant. How substantial is this trust? Richard asked. Initial estimates suggest around $4 million. Not insignificant, but hardly worth committing murder for someone of your financial standing. Diana studied Richard with professional assessment. For others, though, it might represent a powerful motive. The conversation was interrupted by Jason's arrival. Unlike his brother, he'd changed into a fresh suit, his appearance impeccable despite the early hour. His expression, however, reflected the strain of their situation. The board is demanding answers about yesterday's postponement, he reported. Investors are getting nervous. Our stock dropped 3 points in pre-market trading. Richard absorbed this news with the calculated response of someone accustomed to business crises. Schedule a virtual board meeting for this afternoon. I'll address their concerns directly. Jason appeared unconvinced. Dad, they're questioning your judgment. The timing couldn't be worse with the Microsoft acquisition negotiations in the final stages. Some things take precedence over acquisitions, Jason. Richard's voice carried the weight of recent revelation. The board will understand once I explain. Will they? Jason challenged his frustration breaking through. Will they understand you risking a $20 billion deal over 3 random children? The question hung in the air, crystallizing the fundamental choice Richard now faced: the company he had built over decades versus 3 lives that had entered his orbit just yesterday. Before Richard could respond, James announced Dr. Preston's arrival. The pediatrician entered carrying his medical bag, his expression grave as he greeted Richard. I reviewed the lab results this morning. Both infants show signs of prolonged undernourishment. Noah has a severe ear infection that's been untreated for what I estimate to be at least 2 weeks of its size. Dr. Preston's professional demeanor couldn't mask his anger. This constitutes medical neglect, Richard. These children would have faced serious developmental consequences if the situation had continued. Detective Reynolds produced her notebook. Dr. Preston, would you be willing to provide formal testimony to that effect? Without hesitation, the doctor confirmed. And I've already filed a report with DCF detailing my findings. While the adults conferred upstairs in the East Wing, Matthew sat beside Lily as she watched over her sleeping brothers. The medical monitors he'd established beeped softly, tracking the twins' vital signs with hospital-grade precision. Are they going to take us away? Lily asked, her voice small but steady. Matthew, accustomed to delivering difficult news to patients, found himself searching for the right balance between honesty and reassurance. A lot of adults are working very hard to make sure you stay somewhere safe. Lily's gaze remained fixed on her brothers. Aunt Vanessa and Uncle Paul aren't really our aunt and uncle. Mom didn't even like Vanessa. She used to say Vanessa was jealous of everything Mom had. Matthew's clinical instincts sharpened. Did you tell anyone this before? Lily shook her head. They said no one would believe me because I'm just a kid. They said if I told anyone, they'd send Noah and Elijah to different foster homes and I'd never see them again. The calculated cruelty of that threat, leveraging a child's love for her siblings to ensure silence, stirred something primal in Matthew's chest. He had built his medical career around emotional detachment, a necessity for a neurosurgeon who routinely held patients' lives in his hands. Yet this child's quiet courage in the face of sustained abuse was dismantling those carefully constructed barriers. Lily, my father made me a doctor's promise to keep you safe. Matthew selected his words with surgical precision. A doctor's promise can never be broken. It's the strongest promise there is. Lily studied him with cautious hope. Stronger than a pinky promise, much stronger. Matthew demonstrated his most serious expression, the one reserved for explaining complex medical procedures to anxious patients. It's written in the most important rules for doctors anywhere in the world. This solemn assurance seemed to reach Lily in a way that conventional comfort couldn't. Her shoulders relaxed fractionally, and she leaned against Matthew's arm with tentative trust. In another part of Boston, Paul Mitchell paced the cramped office of William Stevens, his agitation evident in every jerky movement. Vanessa sat rigidly in a leather chair, her manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm against her designer handbag. Stevens, a thin man with receding hair and wire-rimmed glasses, exuded the cold calculation of someone accustomed to operating in legal gray areas. His office, unlike his appearance, projected success with its mahogany furniture and law degrees from prestigious universities displayed prominently. Coleman failed, Stevens stated flatly, reviewing the text message on his phone. The detective blocked the transfer with some nonsense about an ongoing investigation. Paul slammed his fist against the bookcase. This is unacceptable. We're less than 48 hours from the trust distribution. If those kids aren't legally in our custody by then, we lose everything. Vanessa's voice cut through her husband's outburst with icy precision. We need another approach. Bennett has resources and connections. We need leverage. Stevens leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. There might be another way. Judge Wilson owes me several favors. With the right pressure, we could secure a more aggressive enforcement order, one that bypasses the detective's objections. What about Bennett's political connections? Paul demanded. The man plays golf with the governor. Stevens smiled thinly. Even Richard Bennett would hesitate to defy a direct judicial order enforced by armed officers. The resulting scandal would devastate his company's stock price and jeopardize his pending acquisition. Vanessa's eyes narrowed with calculation. And if that fails, then we move to contingency plan B. Stevens opened his desk drawer and removed a small vial. If we can't secure custody of all 3 children, we ensure that no one benefits from the trust. The distribution terms require all 3 beneficiaries to be alive at the time of distribution. Paul and Vanessa exchanged glances laden with unspoken understanding. They had already crossed moral boundaries that made this final step seem like a natural progression rather than an unthinkable crime. Make the arrangements, Vanessa instructed, her voice devoid of emotion. One way or another, this ends tomorrow. Back at the Bennett mansion, Richard convened an impromptu council of war in his study. Elizabeth Chen reviewed legal documents spread across the antique desk, while Detective Reynolds used a secure laptop to access police databases. Jason stood by the window phone, constantly buzzing with the corporate concerns, while Matthew had joined them after ensuring the children were securely watched by James. The hearing tomorrow is crucial, Elizabeth emphasized. Everything depends on convincing Judge Martinez that the children face imminent danger if returned to the Mitchells. Diana looked up from her computer. I've been researching the trust fund established by the Walkers. There's something strange about the distribution terms. She turned the screen to show a highlighted document. Originally, the trust was to be distributed when the youngest child turned 18. But 4 months ago, someone modified the terms to require a lump sum distribution exactly 1 year after the parents' deaths, which happens to be tomorrow. Who authorized that change? Richard asked sharply. The legal guardian, technically Paul Mitchell, but the paperwork was processed by a lawyer named William Stevens. Diana's expression darkened. I know Stevens by reputation. He specializes in trust manipulation and has been investigated twice for ethical violations. Jason approached his legal training engaged despite his earlier reluctance. That timing can't be coincidental. Change the terms, then ensure all 3 children are in your custody for the distribution. And if something happened to the children after the money was secured, Matthew left the grim implication unspoken. Richard's expression hardened into granite resolve. We're not just fighting for custody anymore. We're fighting for their lives. Elizabeth nodded grimly. I'll request additional security measures from Judge Martinez, a restraining order against the Mitchells, and supervised visitation only if required by law. I need to place a formal protective watch on the children, Diana added. But I'll need to involve my captain, which means Coleman will almost certainly learn about it. Richard made swift calculations, weighing risks and resources with the same acumen that had built his technology empire. We'll enhance security here as well. James, activate full perimeter protocols and bring in the additional team. The elderly butler nodded already, moving to implement these instructions with the efficiency of someone who had managed the Bennett household through numerous crises. Dad? Jason's voice carried uncharacteristic uncertainty. The Microsoft team is requesting an emergency meeting regarding the acquisition. They're concerned about your recent decisions. Richard absorbed this news, understanding all it implied. The Bennett Technologies acquisition represented the culmination of his life's work, a $20 billion deal that would cement his legacy in the business world. Any disruption now could unravel years of careful negotiation. Tell them I'll call in 1 hour, Richard decided. And Jason, I need you to prepare the board for potential complications. Jason's eyes widened slightly. What kind of complications? The kind that arise when moral imperatives conflict with business interests. Richard's voice was level but resolute. I built Bennett Technologies to create solutions that improve lives. If I can't apply that same principle to 3 children in desperate need, then none of it means anything. The statement hung in the air, representing a fundamental shift in priorities that left Jason visibly struggling to process its implications. Their strategy session was interrupted by a commotion from upstairs. Matthew rushed to investigate, returning moments later with alarm evident in his expression. Noah's fever has spiked again, 105.2. He's having small seizures. We need to get him to a hospital immediately. Richard moved with decisive speed. My car is fastest. Matthew, you'll come with me. Jason, stay with Lily and Elijah. Diana, can you provide escort to clear traffic? The detective nodded, already calling for patrol support. Within minutes, Richard and Matthew were racing toward Boston Children's Hospital, Detective Reynolds' unmarked police car leading the way with lights flashing. In the back seat, Matthew monitored Noah's vital signs with the focused intensity of a combat medic. His pulse is too rapid. Matthew reported medical training overriding all other concerns. We need to get his temperature down gradually. Too quickly could cause shock. Richard navigated Boston traffic with precision driving that belied his executive image. Years of competitive racing, providing skills now deployed for life-saving purpose. Hold on, Noah, Richard murmured, eyes never leaving the road. Just hold on. They reached the hospital's emergency entrance in record time. Medical staff, alerted by Detective Reynolds' advance call, met them with a gurney and immediate assessment. Matthew seamlessly integrated with the medical team, his credentials and expertise, ensuring Noah received immediate expert care. Febrile seizure secondary to acute otitis media, Matthew explained to the attending physician, transferring Noah to the medical team. History of nutritional deficiency, possible dehydration. While Noah was rushed into treatment, Richard found himself momentarily alone in the bustling emergency department corridor. The controlled chaos surrounding him faded to background noise as he confronted the magnitude of his commitment to these children. Less than 24 hours ago, they had been strangers. Now he was racing through Boston with a gravely ill infant, potentially jeopardizing a corporate deal worth billions, and challenging a legal system that seemed inexplicably aligned against them. His phone vibrated, Jason calling from the mansion. Dad, we have a problem. A nurse named Megan just tried to enter through the service entrance, claiming Dr. Preston sent her to check on the children. Security stopped her, but she had a syringe in her bag. She ran when questioned. Richard felt ice form in his veins. Where are Lily and Elijah now? Secure in the panic room with James. Elizabeth is still here. We've activated full lockdown protocols. Good, stay vigilant. I suspect this won't be their last attempt. Richard ended the call, turning to find Matthew emerging from the treatment area. They've stabilized him, Matthew reported. CT scan shows no brain inflammation, thank God. They want to admit him for observation and intravenous antibiotics. Richard nodded, processing both this medical update and the attempted intrusion at home. Matthew, I don't think Noah's fever spiking again was coincidental. Someone tried to enter the mansion with a syringe just now. Matthew's expression transformed physicians' concern, hardening into something more primitive. You think someone deliberately made him sicker? Poisoned him somehow? I think we're dealing with people who view these children as obstacles to $4 million. And tomorrow is their deadline. Richard's voice remained steady, but his eyes reflected cold fury. We need to ensure hospital security understands the situation. No one accesses Noah without proper verification. Matthew nodded grimly. I'll speak with the chief of security personally. I trained with him at Mass General. As they implemented these precautions, Detective Reynolds appeared in the corridor, her expression suggesting unwelcome news. Sheriff Coleman just obtained a new court order from Judge Wilson. It overrides my investigation objections and demands immediate transfer of the children to the Mitchells. She held up the document, frustration evident in her movements. It specifically mentions all 3 children by name. Noah is admitted to the hospital. He can't be moved, Matthew protested. Diana nodded, which gives us a temporary shield for him. But Lily and Elijah remain vulnerable. Coleman is headed to your home now with reinforcements. Richard processed this escalation with the strategic assessment that had built his business empire. Call Elizabeth. Tell her to activate the legal contingency we discussed. While Diana made this call, Richard turned to Matthew. Stay with Noah. Do not leave his side under any circumstances. No matter who comes with what paperwork, you maintain medical custody until I return. Matthew straightened, the reluctant participant of yesterday transformed into a determined protector. No one's taking him. I've invoked medical necessity protocol. As his attending physician, I have 48 hours before any transfer can be implemented. Richard gripped his son's shoulder briefly, a rare gesture of physical affirmation between men who had maintained emotional distance for decades. I'm going back to the mansion. Lily and Elijah can't be there when Coleman arrives. Where will you take them? Matthew asked. Somewhere the Mitchells would never think to look. Richard's expression revealed a plan already forming. Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight. As Richard departed, Matthew returned to Noah's bedside, pulling a chair close to maintain his vigilant watch. The infant, now connected to monitors and IVs, slept peacefully, unaware of the forces battling over his fate. Matthew found himself studying the child's features, the delicate eyelashes, the perfect miniature fingernails, the absolute vulnerability that triggered something deeply protective in his psyche. He had built his career around professional detachment, yet somehow this tiny patient had breached those carefully constructed walls. A nurse entered to check Noah's vital signs, her efficient movements betraying no awareness of the situation's complexity. Dr. Bennett, the attending physician, left these discharge instructions for when the patient stabilizes. They need your signature. She held out a clipboard. Matthew accepted it, scanning the document with practiced efficiency, then froze, medical instincts suddenly on high alert. Who authorized this discharge protocol? It's not standard for pediatric fever cases. The nurse appeared momentarily flustered. Dr. Wilson, I believe. He just came on shift. There is no Dr. Wilson in pediatrics at this hospital. Matthew rose slowly, positioning himself between the nurse and Noah. I need to see your hospital ID. The woman's demeanor changed instantly. She backed toward the door, abandoning the clipboard. I'll get the attending physician. Security! Matthew's voice carried command that sent hospital staff rushing to respond. Stop that woman. The false nurse fled down the corridor, pursued by security personnel, responding to Matthew's alert. In the chaos that followed, Matthew examined the clipboard she had left behind. The discharge instructions included a medication order that would have caused respiratory suppression in an infant Noah's size, not enough to be immediately fatal, but sufficient to cause life-threatening complications once away from hospital monitoring. Matthew's phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Coleman at mansion with team. Elizabeth stalling. Secure Noah at all costs. At the Bennett mansion, Richard arrived to find Sheriff Coleman's vehicles blocking the circular driveway. Elizabeth Chen stood in the doorway, legal documents in hand, engaging Coleman in what appeared to be an intense procedural debate. Richard entered through the service entrance, moving swiftly to the secure room where James guarded Lily and Elijah. The elderly butler's normally impassive expression showed visible relief at his employer's return. Sir, Miss Chen has delayed the sheriff for 20 minutes with legal arguments, but they're becoming increasingly insistent. Lily sat on the floor beside Elijah's portable crib, her small face pale but composed. She looked up as Richard entered, her eyes asking the question before her voice could form the words. Noah is safe, Richard assured her. My son Matthew is taking care of him at the hospital. Now we need to keep you and Elijah safe too. Lily nodded with the gravity of someone far older than her 8 years. They're not going to stop, are they? Not until they get the money. The perceptiveness of her assessment struck Richard anew. This child understood the situation with clarity many adults would lack. No, they're not going to stop, Richard confirmed, respecting her enough to offer truth rather than platitudes. Which is why we need to go somewhere they won't find you until the court hearing tomorrow. Lily stood already gathering Elijah's essentials with practiced efficiency. Where are we going? To see a friend who understands what it means to protect family at all costs. Richard helped her prepare Elijah for travel. Someone the Mitchells would never think to look for you. James activated the mansion's secondary security protocols designed decades earlier to provide the Bennett family with escape options during potential kidnapping threats. A hidden passage connected the panic room to the garage beneath the east wing, bypassing the main areas where Coleman and his deputies now searched. Richard secured Elijah in a car seat in the back of an unmarked SUV, not the Bentley that would be immediately recognized, but a vehicle maintained for security purposes. Lily climbed in beside her brother, her movements betraying neither panic nor hesitation, just the steady resolve of a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. Sir, James said quietly as Richard prepared to depart, Miss Chen will face difficult questions when they discover you've gone. Tell her I've invoked a protocol safe house. She'll understand. Richard clasped the butler's shoulder briefly. Keep Jason out of this if possible, for plausible deniability. James nodded, decades of service giving him insight into Richard's strategies. Godspeed, sir. As the SUV slipped away through a service exit concealed by landscaping, Richard glimpsed Sheriff Coleman through the rearview mirror, his face contorted with rage as he realized his quarry had escaped. The sheriff's angry gestures suggested consequences would follow legal, professional, perhaps even personal. Richard drove with calm precision, taking an indirect route through Boston's maze-like streets to ensure they weren't followed. Beside him, Lily sat quietly, one hand reaching back to maintain constant contact with Elijah. "Mr. Bennett," she finally asked, "are you going to get in trouble because of us?" Richard considered the question with the honesty it deserved. His actions today would have repercussions on his company, his reputation, potentially even his freedom, if Coleman pursued obstruction charges. "Sometimes doing the right thing comes with consequences," he answered, "but that doesn't make it any less right." Lily absorbed this, then asked the question that truly concerned her. "What if they find us before the judge can help?" "That won't happen," Richard's voice carried absolute conviction, "because we're going to the one person in Boston even more stubborn than I am when it comes to protecting family." The SUV turned onto a quiet street in South Boston, a neighborhood far removed from Richard's usual circles. He parked before a modest three-story building with a small sign reading Rosa's Place above the door. A formidable woman in her 70s appeared in the doorway before they could exit the vehicle. Rosa Diaz had silver streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun, weathered skin that spoke of a life lived without compromise, and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple black dress with a cardigan despite the summer heat, and her posture suggested a lifetime of standing firm against whatever challenges life presented. "Richard Bennett," she called, her voice carrying the faint accent of her Dominican birth. "It's been many years." Richard guided Lily and carried Elijah toward the entrance. "Hello, Rosa. I need your help." Rosa's sharp eyes took in the children, understanding immediately. "Trouble follows these little ones." It wasn't a question. "Yes, dangerous trouble." Rosa nodded, one stepping aside to admit them. "Then they are welcome here. No one finds those I choose to hide." Inside, the modest exterior gave way to a warm, immaculately maintained home with multiple rooms. Several women of various ages moved about, some with young children of their own. Rosa had founded this place 30 years earlier as a shelter for women and children escaping domestic violence. Its location remained unlisted, its security systems state-of-the-art despite its humble appearance. "Rosa saved my life once," Richard explained to Lily as they followed the elderly woman to a private room at the back of the house. "A long time ago, before I became successful." "You were foolish then," Rosa corrected, though without rancor. "Running with bad men, thinking money mattered more than character." Richard nodded, accepting the assessment. "Rosa straightened me out, helped me understand what truly matters. I wouldn't have Bennett Technologies without her." "And now you bring children hunted for money," Rosa observed, preparing a space for Elijah's portable crib. "The wheel turns and lessons return to be learned again." Richard introduced Lily and explained their situation in terms the girl could understand while still conveying the gravity to Rosa. The older woman listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly stern. "These people who hunt children for money," Rosa said when he finished, "they have not met Rosa Diaz." She turned to Lily with unexpected gentleness. "Child, no one will find you here. This place has protected hundreds before you." For the first time since meeting her, Richard saw Lily's composure crack slightly. The girl's shoulders trembled as Rosa's absolute conviction penetrated the armor of self-reliance she had been forced to construct. "Thank you." Lily whispered, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. Rosa merely nodded, understanding all that remained unspoken. "Richard, you have matters to attend to. Go. The children stay with me until your court tomorrow." Richard knelt to Lily's level, meeting her eyes directly. "I have to leave you here for a little while. There are things I need to do to make sure you, Noah, and Elijah stay safe permanently." Lily studied him with that preternatural assessment that seemed beyond her years. "You promise you'll come back?" "I promise." Richard held her gaze steadily. "And I have never broken a promise in my life." As he prepared to leave, his phone buzzed with a message from Jason. "Microsoft pulled out of the deal. Board calling emergency session. Need you at headquarters ASAP." The news represented the collapse of plans years in the making. The acquisition would have secured Bennett Technologies' position as an industry leader for decades to come. Its failure would cost shareholders billions and potentially Richard's position as CEO. Rosa, with her uncanny perception, read the significance in his expression. "Your company is in trouble because of these children." Yes, Richard saw no point in pretense. But companies can be rebuilt. Children only get one chance to grow up safely. Rosa nodded, a trace of approval softening her stern features. "Perhaps you learned my lessons better than I thought, Richard Bennett." As Richard departed, Lily and Elijah settled into the unexpected sanctuary under Rosa's watchful care. He drove toward Bennett Technologies' headquarters, where the board awaited with questions he could not fully answer and accusations he could not entirely refute. The future of his company hung in the balance. His sons were scattered, Matthew guarding Noah, Jason likely furious about the collapsed deal. Sheriff Coleman would be pursuing obstruction charges. The Mitchells and Stevens would be planning their next move. And somewhere in Boston, 3 small lives depended entirely on his willingness to risk everything he had built. Tomorrow's court hearing would determine not just custody, but whether justice could prevail against a system manipulated by those willing to sacrifice children for financial gain. Richard tightened his grip on the steering wheel, or his final words echoing in his mind. Promise me you'll never abandon anyone else the way you abandoned us. Some promises transcended business empires. Some battles were worth fighting regardless of cost. And sometimes a man discovered what truly defined him only when everything he valued was placed at risk. In Rosa's shelter, Lily sat beside Elijah's crib, whispering reassurances to her sleeping brother. "It's going to be okay now," she murmured. "Mr. Bennett promised, and he doesn't break promises." Rosa, watching from the doorway, whispered a prayer for the children and for the man who had chosen to stand between them and danger, regardless of the price he would pay. The battle lines were drawn. Tomorrow would determine who would emerge victorious, and what they would lose in the process. The first rays of dawn painted Boston's skyline in hues of gold and amber as Richard Bennett gazed out from his corporate office window. The reflection of a man at a crossroads stared back at him from the glass superimposed over the city he had helped build. The emergency board meeting had concluded after 6 grueling hours. The vote of confidence had been narrow, 8-6 in his favor with 2 abstentions. The Microsoft acquisition was officially dead. Bennett Technologies stock had plummeted 17% in after-hours trading. Financial news outlets were already calling it Bennett's folly. Richard straightened his tie, a habit born of decades where appearance translated to power. Today he would need every ounce of that authority. In less than 3 hours, he would stand before Judge Rebecca Martinez and fight for the lives of 3 children who just 48 hours earlier had been strangers to him. His phone vibrated with incoming messages. From Matthew Noah Stable, fever down to 100.2, 2 attempts to access his room during night shift. Hospital security increased. We're ready. From Detective Reynolds, evidence compilation complete. Forensic accountant found direct payments from Stevens to Coleman. Meeting you at courthouse. Bringing backup. From Elizabeth Chen, Judge Martinez reviewing our filing now. Hearing closed to public. Mitchell legal team requesting delay. Denied. See you at 8:30. Richard took one final look at the city below. The empire he'd spent a lifetime building now teetered on the edge because of a choice made in an instant on a suburban sidewalk. He regretted nothing. The private elevator descended directly to the underground parking garage. As the doors opened, Richard found Jason waiting beside the car, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. "I didn't expect to see you here," Richard said, genuine surprise breaking through his composed exterior. Jason's expression remained guarded, professional. The board might have questions after the hearing. Someone should represent corporate interests. He paused, then added with careful precision, and family interests. The simple statement carried layers of meaning. It wasn't quite an endorsement of Richard's actions, but it acknowledged that bonds existed beyond balance sheets and quarterly reports. "Thank you," Richard said simply. The drive to the courthouse passed in tense silence, each man occupied with private calculations of risk and consequence. Boston was already awake, the morning commute filling streets with purposeful activity. None of these passers-by knew that in courtroom 3R4 of the Suffolk County Courthouse, the fate of 3 children and perhaps the soul of a man would be decided. They arrived to find Detective Reynolds waiting on the courthouse steps, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers. Her usual professional composure appeared strained, dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting a sleepless night. "Stevens mobilized significant resources overnight," she reported without preamble as they climbed the steps. Judge Wilson signed 3 separate orders attempting to override Judge Martinez's jurisdiction. "Will they succeed?" Jason asked, his legal training engaging despite his reservations. "No, Martinez outranks Wilson and has seniority, but it shows how desperate they're becoming." Diana glanced at her watch. The Mitchells and Stevens arrived 15 minutes ago. They brought Coleman with them. In the courthouse corridor, Elizabeth Chen awaited them outside courtroom 304. Her silver-streaked hair pulled back in its customary chignon, her expression revealing nothing of the legal battle to come. Martinez is known for punctuality and intolerance of procedural games. Elizabeth briefed them in hushed tones. Our evidence goes first, followed by the Mitchells' response. Character witnesses limited to 3 minutes each. She turned to Richard. We've arranged for Rosa to bring Lily at precisely 9:15. Noah remains under medical care with Matthew standing guard. The hospital has arranged for video testimony if necessary. Richard nodded, absorbing these details with the same focused attention he brought to corporate acquisitions. But this wasn't business. This was 3 lives hanging in the balance. And the pocket watch, Richard asked. You're sure it's admissible? Elizabeth's expression remained carefully neutral. Judge Martinez has reviewed the circumstances. Lily took it from her father's personal effects before the Mitchells could inventory them. As his daughter, she had every right to keep a memento. More importantly, its contents are explosive. The courtroom doors opened at precisely 8:55. Inside, the space projected the solemn authority of the American legal system. Polished wood, the state seal prominently displayed the judge's bench elevated above the proceedings. Paul and Vanessa Mitchell sat at the defendant's table, their expressions carefully crafted into masks of concerned guardians. Paul wore a conservative suit that couldn't quite hide his physical tension. Vanessa had chosen a subdued floral dress, her hair styled to project maternal warmth. Beside them sat William Stevens, thin-lipped and calculating, his expensive suit and gold cufflinks subtly communicating influence and power. Sheriff Coleman occupied a seat directly behind them, his uniform pressed to military precision, his face set in professional neutrality that didn't quite reach his eyes. The bailiff's voice cut through the tension. All rise, the Honorable Judge Rebecca Martinez presiding. Judge Martinez entered with brisk efficiency. In her early 60s, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades cutting through deception to find truth. Her salt and pepper hair was cropped short, her dark eyes missing nothing as she surveyed the courtroom. Be seated, she instructed, arranging papers before her. This is an emergency custody hearing regarding Lily Noah and Elijah Walker. Given the sensitive nature and the involvement of minors, I've ordered the proceedings sealed. She looked up, her gaze sharp. Let me be clear from the outset. This court's sole interest is the welfare of these children. Procedural gamesmanship will not be tolerated. Stevens rose immediately. Your Honor, we must object to the very foundation of these proceedings. My clients are the legally appointed guardians of these children. Mr. Bennett has effectively kidnapped them in violation of... Mr. Stevens, Judge Martinez interrupted. You'll have your opportunity to present arguments in due course. Ms. Chen, you may proceed with your evidence. Elizabeth approached the bench, handing the clerk a bound portfolio. Your Honor, we present 3 categories of evidence. First, medical documentation of the children's condition when they came into Mr. Bennett's care. Second, forensic evidence regarding the deaths of the children's parents. And third, financial documentation revealing motives behind the current custody arrangement. As Elizabeth methodically presented their case, Richard watched the Mitchells carefully. Vanessa maintained her mask of concern, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. Paul's jaw muscles worked increasingly as each piece of evidence was introduced, his complexion reddening with barely suppressed anger or fear. Dr. Preston testified first, his medical credentials impeccable, his assessment unequivocal. Both infants showed signs of prolonged undernourishment. Noah's ear infection left untreated could have resulted in permanent hearing loss or worse. Their developmental markers were falling behind expected milestones consistent with inadequate nutrition and care. Stevens cross-examined aggressively, suggesting the conditions could have developed after Bennett took the children, but Dr. Preston remained unshakable. The conditions I documented require weeks to develop. They could not possibly have occurred during the brief time in Mr. Bennett's care. Detective Reynolds followed, presenting the forensic evidence regarding the Walker's car accident. The brake lines show clear evidence of deliberate tampering. This was not an accident, Your Honor. It was vehicular homicide. Stevens rose again. Your Honor, while these allegations are concerning, they have no direct bearing on the custody matter before the court. Judge Martinez's expression hardened slightly. Mr. Stevens, I will determine what evidence is relevant. Detective Reynolds continued. Diana proceeded to outline the financial connections her investigation had uncovered. Payments from Stevens to Coleman, modifications to the trust fund distribution terms, the suspicious timing of the Mitchells' guardianship application. Your Honor, the trust established by James and Catherine Walker was originally structured to provide for their children's care through adulthood with principal distribution at age 18. 4 months ago, these terms were modified to require full distribution exactly 1 year after the parents' deaths, which happens to be today. Judge Martinez leaned forward slightly. And who authorized these modifications? Paul Mitchell, as legal guardian with William Stevens serving as trust attorney. Diana placed another document before the court. We've also discovered that Vanessa Mitchell was the contingent beneficiary should anything happen to all three children. A murmur ran through the small assemblage in the courtroom. Judge Martinez struck her gavel, once restoring silence. Detective, are you suggesting the Mitchells intended harm to these children? The evidence strongly suggests so, Your Honor. Last night, a woman impersonating medical staff attempted to access Noah Walker's hospital room with a syringe containing a respiratory depressant. Security cameras captured her meeting with Paul Mitchell 30 minutes earlier. Paul Mitchell surged to his feet, his composure finally cracking. This is outrageous. These are lies. Sit down, Mr. Mitchell, Judge Martinez ordered sharply. You'll have your opportunity to respond. The courtroom doors opened quietly, admitting Rosa Diaz. The elderly woman's dignified presence drew all eyes as she escorted Lily down the center aisle. The girl walked with measured steps, her small shoulders square, despite the obvious fear in her eyes. Vanessa Mitchell half rose, her expression shifting to calculated affection. Lily, sweetheart, we've been so worried. Lily flinched visibly, moving closer to Rosa's protective presence. Judge Martinez addressed the child directly, her tone gentling. Lily, I'm Judge Martinez. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions. Would that be all right? Lily nodded, her gaze fixed on the judge rather than the Mitchells. I understand you're 8 years old. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. I'll be 9 next month. Lily, can you tell me about living with your aunt and uncle after your parents died? Stevens interjected. Your Honor, the child's testimony is inherently unreliable given her age and the obvious influence. Mr. Stevens, Judge Martinez cut him off firmly. This court will hear from the child. Lily stood before the judge's bench, her voice small but steady. They said we were lucky they took us in, that nobody else wanted 3 kids. They said we had to earn our keep. She paused, gathering courage. Noah and Elijah only got 1 scoop of formula each day, even when they were sick. When I tried to give them more, Aunt Vanessa hit me and poured the milk on the floor. Did anyone else ever see how they treated you? Lily shook her head. They were different when people came over. They made me stay in the closet with Noah and Elijah so no one would hear them crying. Lily, did you ever hear your aunt or uncle say anything about your parents' accident? The girl's eyes widened slightly. The night before my parents died, I heard Uncle Paul on the phone. He said, make sure it looks like an accident. No survivors. Paul Mitchell lunged to his feet again. She's lying. The little brat is making this up. Bailiff restrain, Mr. Mitchell, Judge Martinez ordered. Once order was restored, she addressed Lily again. Is there anything else you think I should know, Lily? Lily hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew a small object, a tarnished pocket watch. This was my dad's. He always recorded his important meetings because he was forgetful. After the accident, I hid it under the floorboards in my room so they wouldn't take it away. Dad was recording the day before when Uncle Paul came to our house. Detective Reynolds stepped forward. Your Honor, our technical team examined this device. It contains a recording from the day before James and Catherine Walker died. Judge Martinez nodded. Play it. The courtroom fell silent as a man's voice filled the room. James Walker, speaking with Paul Mitchell. Paul, I don't understand why you need access to the children's trust documents. Just reviewing options, James. With 3 kids, college planning gets complicated. But why involve this Stevens person? We already have a family attorney. Stevens specializes in trust law, just looking out for my niece and nephews if anything happens to you and Catherine. Nothing's going to happen to us, Paul. And frankly, I'm concerned about some of the questions you've been asking. Vanessa mentioned contingent beneficiaries yesterday, which seemed odd. The recording continued for another minute, revealing Paul's increasingly transparent interest in the Walker family's financial arrangements. When it ended, the silence in the courtroom felt charged with understanding. Judge Martinez turned to the Mitchells. Do either of you wish to respond to this evidence? Stevens conferred hurriedly with his clients, then stood. Your Honor, while the recording may raise questions, it proves nothing illegal. My clients have been the children's legal guardians for a year, providing stable care under difficult circumstances. Mr. Bennett, despite his resources, has no legal standing whatsoever. We ask that the court enforce the existing guardianship and return the children immediately. Judge Martinez's expression revealed nothing as she considered the arguments. I'll hear from Mr. Bennett now. Richard approached the witness stand, aware that everything the children's future justice for their parents, perhaps even his own redemption, depended on the next few minutes. Mr. Bennett, you intervened in this situation just 2 days ago. What prompted you to take such drastic action? Richard spoke simply, directly, without the corporate polish that had defined his public persona for decades. I witnessed a young girl being struck for trying to feed her infant brothers. I saw babies suffering from fever and malnutrition. I saw neighbors watching from windows but doing nothing. He paused, the memory still raw. 25 years ago, I lost my wife during childbirth due to complications that weren't caught in time. Her last words to me were an accusation that I had abandoned her when she needed me most, because I prioritized my company over my family. The courtroom remained utterly silent, even Stevens momentarily stilled by the unexpected personal revelation. I built Bennett Technologies into a multi-billion-dollar company, Your Honor. I created technologies used worldwide. But when I saw those 3 children abandoned on that sidewalk, I realized that all my achievements meant nothing if I walked past suffering I could prevent. Richard met the judge's gaze directly. I have no legal claim to these children. I can offer only what every child deserves: safety care and a chance to grow up without fear. Judge Martinez studied him thoughtfully. Your intervention has already cost you professionally, has it not? Yes, Your Honor. The Microsoft acquisition of Bennett Technologies collapsed yesterday due to concerns about my judgment in this matter. Our stock has fallen significantly. The board of directors held an emergency session regarding my leadership. Yet you're here. Some things matter more than stock prices, Your Honor. The simple statement hung in the air, unadorned by legal argument or emotional appeal, yet carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Judge Martinez nodded once, then addressed the courtroom. I'll take 15 minutes to review all evidence before rendering my decision. She rose, adding, Sheriff Coleman, please remain in the courtroom. I have questions regarding your involvement in this matter. Coleman's face remained impassive, but his posture stiffened noticeably. As the judge departed, the courtroom erupted into hushed conversations. Richard returned to his seat beside Jason, who leaned closer to speak privately. Dad, whatever happens, I understand why you did this. The simple statement bridged years of emotional distance between them. Richard nodded, words momentarily unnecessary between father and son. Across the aisle, the atmosphere at the Mitchells' table had changed dramatically. Stevens was whispering furiously to Paul, whose face had gone from red to ashen. Vanessa sat motionless, her eyes fixed on Lily with an expression that had abandoned all pretense of maternal concern. 15 minutes stretched to 20. Detective Reynolds received a text message that caused her to exit the courtroom briefly. When she returned, she spoke quietly to Elizabeth, who nodded with grim satisfaction. At precisely 10:47, Judge Martinez returned. The courtroom rose, then settled into tense silence as she arranged her notes. Before rendering my decision on custody, I must address a related matter. She looked directly at Sheriff Coleman. Sheriff, this court has received evidence of financial transactions between yourself, Mr. Stevens, and the Mitchells that suggests serious ethical violations at minimum and potentially criminal conspiracy. Bailiff, please detain Sheriff Coleman pending further investigation. Coleman half rose in protest, but the court officers moved with practiced efficiency, securing him before he could speak. Your Honor, I object in the strongest possible terms. Stevens was on his feet. These allegations are completely unfounded and prejudicial to my client's position. Mr. Stevens, Detective Reynolds, has just informed me that the district attorney has approved arrest warrants for Paul and Vanessa Mitchell on charges of conspiracy to commit murder in connection with the deaths of James and Catherine Walker. Those warrants are being executed now. As if on cue, 2 police officers entered the courtroom, moving directly to the Mitchells. Vanessa collapsed into theatrical sobs while Paul stood rigidly, his expression frozen in disbelief. No, this isn't happening, Paul muttered as the officers recited his Miranda rights. You don't understand. The money transfers today. Everything was arranged. Paul, shut up, Stevens hissed, but it was too late. Judge Martinez watched this unfold with the composed demeanor of someone who had witnessed every variety of human failing during her years on the bench. When the Mitchells had been escorted out, she addressed the remaining participants. Regarding the custody matter before this court, I find compelling evidence that Lily Noah and Elijah Walker have suffered neglect and endangerment while under the guardianship of Paul and Vanessa Mitchell. I hereby revoke their guardianship, effective immediately. Lily, seated beside Rosa, straightened slightly, hope brightening her features for the first time. Emergency temporary custody is granted to Richard Bennett, subject to regular review by family services. A more permanent arrangement will be considered after the criminal matters are resolved. Judge Martinez's gaze softened slightly as she addressed Lily directly. Young lady, the court believes your testimony, and I commend your courage in protecting your brothers. She turned back to Richard. Mr. Bennett, this court is entrusting you with 3 vulnerable lives. I expect regular reports on their welfare and progress. Yes, Your Honor. Richard's voice remained steady despite the emotion tightening his throat. I understand the responsibility fully. Then this court is adjourned. The gavel struck once definitive. As the formalities concluded, Lily broke protocol, running to Richard and throwing her arms around his waist. The spontaneous gesture of trust and relief spoke more eloquently than any legal victory. Elizabeth gathered their documents while Detective Reynolds conferred with the remaining officers about the arrests. Jason approached his father, professional reserve momentarily set aside. The board will need to be informed, Jason said, then added more quietly, and Matthew should hear the news about Noah and Elijah. Richard nodded, one hand still resting protectively on Lily's shoulder. Call Matthew. Tell him we're coming to the hospital now. Outside the courthouse, late morning sunlight bathed Boston in deceptive tranquility. Television crews had gathered on the steps, alerted by the arrests taking place inside. Richard guided Lily through a side exit, Rosa following with quiet dignity. Is it really over? Lily asked as they reached the car. Can we stay with you now? Yes, Richard answered, the simple word carrying the weight of commitment rather than mere permission. Let's go see your brothers. Boston Children's Hospital existed in its own reality, a world where life's most precious gifts hung in precarious balance daily. Richard led their small group through corridors where joy and heartbreak coexisted in neighboring rooms. They found Matthew in Noah's room, the young doctor showing signs of his all-night vigil, but standing resolutely beside the infant's crib. Noah's color had improved dramatically, his breathing steady, the worst of the fever broken. The judge granted custody, Richard announced simply. Matthew's professional composure cracked slightly, relief evident in the loosening of his shoulders. Good, that's good. He cleared his throat, gesturing to the monitors. His infection is responding well to the antibiotics. They want to keep him another day for observation, but the prognosis is excellent. Lily approached the crib, carefully reaching through the side rails to touch her brother's hand. Noah's tiny fingers curled reflexively around hers, triggering the first genuine smile Richard had seen on the girl's face. He knows it's you, Matthew said softly. He always does, Lily confirmed. Even when he was really little. Noah and Elijah always know when I'm there. Rosa, who had remained the quiet presence throughout, spoke for the first time since the courtroom. Family knows family. Blood speaks to blood. She turned to Richard, her assessment direct. You will bring them to visit me sometimes. These children need many people who love them. Of course, Richard agreed, recognizing both the statement and the underlying promise it sought. Rosa had protected Lily and Elijah at a crucial moment. She would remain part of their extended safety net. Jason's phone rang, drawing him away from the intimate scene. When he returned, his expression had shifted back to corporate calculation. The board wants an emergency session at 4. The news about the Mitchells' arrest is breaking. Our stock has already rebounded 6 points. He hesitated, then added, they're reconsidering the Microsoft acquisition. The CEO called personally. Richard absorbed this information with newfound perspective. Tell them I'll be there after the children are settled. The simple prioritization represented a fundamental shift, one that Jason acknowledged with a slight nod of understanding. As hospital staff prepared Noah for discharge the following day, Detective Reynolds arrived with an update. Stevens is cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. The conspiracy appears to extend beyond the Walkers' deaths. There may be other families, other trust funds. Will he serve time? Richard asked. Significant time, Diana confirmed. The Mitchells too. The DA is pursuing maximum charges. And the children's trust secured. With the fraud exposed, the original terms have been reinstated. The funds will be held until they reach adulthood with quarterly disbursements for their care and education. 1 week later, Richard stood in the doorway of what had once been a formal guest suite in the Bennett mansion. The room had transformed, walls now a soft blue instead of austere beige stuffed animals arranged on shelves, a rocking chair positioned near windows overlooking the garden. Lily sat cross-legged on a colorful rug, reading a picture book to her brothers. Noah and Elijah, now alert and gaining healthy weight, watched their sister with rapt attention, occasionally reaching to pat the book's bright illustrations. They like this one, Lily explained as Richard entered. Mom used to read it to me when I was little. Richard sat beside them, observing the gentle interaction. Your mother sounds like a wonderful woman. She was, Lily confirmed, her voice carrying the simple certainty of a child's truth. Dad, too. They would have liked you. The statement offered, without calculation or guile, struck Richard with unexpected force. He had built his identity around professional accomplishment for so long that genuine human connections sometimes still caught him off guard. I wish I could have known them, he said honestly. You sort of do, Lily said, turning another page. Through us. The wisdom in her statement, the recognition that parents live on through their children, left Richard momentarily speechless. From the doorway, Matthew cleared his throat softly. Dad, the adoption attorney, is here. Richard nodded, rising carefully to avoid disturbing the children's reading session. In the hallway, he found not only Matthew but Jason as well, both sons, having rearranged their professional obligations to be present for this significant moment. You're sure about this? Jason asked quietly. Permanent adoption is, well, permanent. I've never been more certain of anything, Richard replied. The brothers exchanged glances, a lifetime of shared experience, allowing for wordless communication. Both had witnessed their father's transformation over the past week from corporate titan, defined by acquisition strategies and market position, to a man rediscovering purpose beyond balance sheets. Then we're with you, Matthew said simply. The attorney waited in Richard's study documents, arranged precisely on the antique desk. The process would take months to complete home studies, background checks, court appearances, but today marked the formal beginning. As Richard signed the initial application papers, he felt the weight of the commitment not as a burden, but as an anchor, something that finally moored him to what truly mattered. That evening, as dusk settled over Boston, Richard supervised bath time for the twins, while Lily selected their pajamas with careful consideration. The domesticity of the scene stood in stark contrast to the corporate battlefield he had commanded for decades. Later, with the twins sleeping soundly and Lily fighting to keep her eyes open despite insisting she wasn't tired, Richard sat in the rocking chair beside her bed. Would you like a story? He offered, gesturing to the bookshelf now filled with children's classics. Lily shook her head, snuggling deeper under covers that still seemed luxuriously soft to her. Can I ask you something instead? Of course. Are you sad about your company? Jason said the deal didn't happen because of us. The question revealed how much this 8-year-old observed and absorbed, how carefully she monitored the adults around her for signs of resentment or regret. Richard considered his answer carefully. The company will be fine. We're already exploring other opportunities. But even if it wasn't fine, even if everything fell apart tomorrow, I wouldn't regret what happened on that sidewalk. Lily studied him with the solemn assessment that seemed beyond her years. Because of your wife, because of what you promised her. Partly, Richard acknowledged, but also because sometimes life gives us second chances to become who we should have been all along. The explanation seemed to satisfy her. Lily's eyelids finally surrendered to gravity, her breathing settling into the rhythm of childhood sleep that represented absolute trust in those who kept watch. Richard remained in the rocking chair, the mansion quiet around him. Through the window, Boston's lights sparkled against the darkness. The city where he had built his fortune lost his way and found unexpected redemption in 3 small lives that now depended on him. On the bedside table sat a silver-framed photograph of James and Catherine Walker, smiling from a happier time. Beside it stood a similar frame holding an image of Sarah, forever young, forever reminding Richard of promises broken and now perhaps redeemed. I think I understand now, he whispered to both images, to the parents whose legacy he now protected and to the wife whose absence had shaped him in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. It was never about the empire. It was always about family. Outside, autumn's first leaves drifted past the window, marking the passage of one season into another. Inside the Bennett mansion, a different kind of change had already taken root. The transformation of a house into a home, of legal responsibility, into love of a man who had everything, into one who finally understood what everything truly meant. 1 year later, the autumn colors blazed across Boston Common as Richard Bennett walked hand in hand with Lily, now 9.5, while pushing a double stroller containing the twins. At 18 months, Noah and Elijah babbled excitedly, pointing at squirrels and falling leaves, their once frail bodies now robust and healthy. The Microsoft acquisition had eventually gone through, albeit with different terms that reflected the new priorities of Bennett Technologies. Richard had insisted on maintaining controlling interest, unwilling to cede decision-making to any entity that might not share his values. The board, initially skeptical, had come to recognize that his enhanced public image as the last protector had unexpected marketing advantages. Matthew and Jason followed a few steps behind, engaged in friendly argument about the twins' education. Matthew favored early music lessons while Jason insisted on language immersion. Their rivalry now channeled into who could be the better uncle rather than who could better please their father. "Dad, look!" Lily pointed toward the pond where a family of ducks glided across the water. Richard felt the simple word dad resonate through him. The adoption had been finalized 3 months ago after exhaustive background checks, home studies, and court appearances. The Walker children were now officially Bennett children, though Richard insisted on keeping their original surname as middle names to honor their birth parents. "Beautiful," Richard agreed, stopping to let Lily lead the twins to the water's edge. A passing jogger recognized him, calling out, "Hey, aren't you that CEO who took in those kids? Read about you in the Globe." "Good man." Richard nodded politely but turned back to watch his children. His real legacy wasn't the technology company that bore his name or the buildings that shaped Boston's skyline, but the 3 young lives now entrusted to his care. A soft vibration from his pocket signaled an incoming call. Richard glanced at the screen, the board chairman. Once he would have answered immediately. Now he silenced the phone without hesitation. Some bread tucked inside Lily's coat pocket caught Richard's attention. Not hidden, just carried openly for feeding the ducks. No more food secreted away for emergencies. No more preparing for abandonment. Just a little girl happy and secure teaching her brothers how to toss crumbs to eager ducks. Just a family, just what mattered most. Some men spent lifetimes building monuments to their success. Richard Bennett had finally discovered that the most meaningful legacy was measured not in corporate acquisitions or stock valuations, but in the trust of children who no longer feared tomorrow. He had become at last the man he was meant to be, a protector.